On the wide open plains where the coyotes play, a bard sings a tale at the end of the day. Under the stars with the moon as his guide, he's weaving a story, no need to hide. His voice carries far on the whispering breeze, a saga of heroes and tall prairie trees, whispered secrets in the rustling grass, talking of futures and speaking of past. Oh, bard on the plains, sing your song tonight, with your tales of glory and wild delight. We've gathered around just to hear you spin the stories of old and the new to begin.
Good morning, everyone. It's time for another Sunday morning rambling. I know I'm not real consistent about posting to this podcast. I keep saying I'm going to try and get better, and I keep working on it. I have to keep examining my process. What makes me I want to do this, but then after a while I get tired of it. And I have to examine what it is that is making me not post more. And I think I have kind of come to realize I need to just quit doing a little bit less of certain things. Because before when I would do a podcast episode, I'd edit it, which you have to do, but then I would post it, and then put it on social media. But then I would also I've got a website for all of my podcasts, and I have a personal website that I post my other stuff to. And I started to realize this, just keeping up those websites is kind of time consuming, kind of a pain in the butt. You got to go in there, edit things, and then, I want to tweak this, I want to tweak that. And maybe what I just need to do to get myself to post more consistently is just, eliminate some things. So I'm still going to have my website there. It'll still have information on it, but I'm not going to be putting the current episodes on there. Maybe I just kind of need to go in there, tidy them up, and just be done with them, not tinker with them anymore. And just have it be a landing page, or maybe just make a landing page on. I'm still going to keep up my mike-mcpeak.com website and just use that as maybe my one home for everything, and just put a couple static pages on there for my podcast where you can find them and all this kind of stuff, and just like I say, simplify my life a little bit, and so that I do get on here and post and talk more often, because there are things that I like to talk about, and I want to try and keep this about South Dakota and about farming and life in South Dakota. And I'm going to put my viewpoints out there. I'm not going to try and get political about stuff, because God knows we've had enough politics, especially in the last few weeks and the last 4 years, certainly, and even beyond that. But I'm not going to be afraid to put my opinions out there and what I think and stuff, but I'm not going to necessarily preach at people and do that kind of stuff. But I just kind of wanted to do that, and just kind of give you guys an update on what I'm doing, and try to get back to things. Today I think maybe I'm going to talk about the farm I grew up on, because I always talk about the farm, but I never really say a lot about it. And it's obviously has played a part in my my life growing up, and the things I've learned and the way I do stuff. But I've never really sat down to describe it. It's more than just land. We have the farm, as I collectively call it, although it's made up of several different sections, is about 1,000 acres. But it's split up into groups. We have what we call the home place. That is 320 acres less 6.2 acres. That's part of the legal description. Anybody who's bought land will understand what a legal description is. It's this whole way of pinpointing where the land is, and I'm not going to give you the whole legal description, but it's something to the effect of the northwest 1/4 of section whatever of range whatever. I can't even remember all the everything that goes into it, but so when I say that it's and for those people who don't really understand, maybe I should lay a little groundwork for people who have never farmed or aren't around the community to understand what we're talking about. First, an acre of land is roughly about 3/4 of the size of a football field. So if you can picture a football field, you can kind of picture what an acre of land is. So just picture about 1,000 of them, and that's kind of how much land we own. And then when I refer to a section, the thing about South Dakota that it's not just South Dakota. I want to say most Midwest states where we have wide open prairies that aren't interrupted by mountain ranges or too many winding rivers or anything like that. Most of the Midwest is laid out in a very easy to understand grid system, and that's what this whole legal description is based on, is your range numbers based off the longitude and latitudinal lines that make up a map. And so a section of land is 1 square mile of land. And 1 square mile of land is equal to 640 acres. So when I say the home place is a half section, that is 320 acres of land. And when I said that it's less 6.23 acres is because the last episode I talked about the road that ran past our place, and that curve that's in there. Well, that curve cuts off a corner of our section there, and that actually is included in the neighbor's land across the road there. So even though technically it is part of that legal description, it is taken out and put into the neighbor's land, because who wants to have a little 6.3 acre piece of land on the other side of the road? In real terms, in farming out here in the Midwest, it's not a very big field to plant on, and actually that land over there you couldn't plant on anyway because it's part of a little ravine that runs through the land, so it's all sloped land. And what are you going to do with 6.23 acres of pasture land? You could put like 1 cow in there. So it'd be a hassle. So it's just easier, just take it out of our land, put it with the neighbor's land. As long as everybody understands that, everybody's happy. So that's the size of the home place. But and like I say, there is about 4 different farms or areas that make up the farm. So we have the home place, we have a place called Babbler's, a place called Goodman's. Now let me count here. So yeah, we got the home place, we got Goodman's, we got Babbler's, we got Hallberg's, and we have the school section. So that's actually five places that make up the land. The home place, we called it that because that's where we home. That's home. That's where we live. The basically the other 4 sections of land are named after who we bought them from. The one place, let me talk about the home place. I'll talk about each one individually here, and not go into great detail and bore you guys too much. But the home place is, where we live. It's where the house is at, and that's probably the one I'm most attached to, because that's where I spent a large part of my childhood growing up. Is there, wandering around the farm, the tree belts, the shelter belts. So it's mostly flat land. It's right on the edge of the James River Escarpment. That was a term that my brother taught me, probably about 30, 40 years ago. And it's just the term for it's a geographic term that means basically the edge of a valley, or, the edge of where the land starts to drop off. And so if you go about 100 yards west of where our house is at, you can stand on the very edge of the James River escarpment. And what that means is that we can stand there and we look, we have this, I consider it a really great view where we can look down into the James River Valley. I've never quite been able to figure out how far we can see because the land just trails off into this infinite horizon out there and things just disappear, and I can't really pick out any landmarks so I can tell how far we really can see. I do know for sure that we can see the airport lights in Huron, and that's about 40 miles as the crow flies. I've also tried counting the REA, the Rural Electrification Association, has these big transmission power lines, ones with the great big towers, with the arms that stick out in the lines that come from the hydroelectric dams along the Missouri River there. And it carries power and distributes it to the other parts of South Dakota and wherever else it goes. And so there are these big towers that are quite noticeable. You can count them for a while, but again, it's one of those things that they just disappear into this parallax point where they all just come to one, and you just can't quite distinguish them, and you can't quite count them. So we have this really majestic view looking from there. And the other key features of the home place, we have 2 shelter belts, the one right beside the road that I kind of talked about a little bit, and then out in the more towards the middle of that, or not quite the middle of the home half section, there is another 5-acre shelter belt. Dad was always a big believer in shelter belts because he was born in 1915 and he grew up during the Depression. And part of the Depression was that there was a drought and really bad erosion. And so there's a lot of land that the wind came through. It was dry. There wasn't much to stop the wind. And people in the past had never been a problem because South Dakota was all covered in grass. But when people moved in and started farming and tilling the ground to raise crops, then you expose the dirt. And if there's no vegetation there to stop it, or sparse vegetation, the wind starts blowing and starts blowing the soil away. And a lot of it, blew in the wind, ended up in rivers, and got carried down to the Gulf of Mexico, because a lot of these little streams out here merge up with like the James River, and eventually the James River merges up with the Missouri, and the Missouri merges with the Mississippi, and then it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's probably land or soil down in the Gulf of Mexico that once upon a time may have been up here in South Dakota, maybe even part of our farm. So Dad was a big believer in shelter belts, because the thing about shelter belts is it does disrupt the wind, so you don't, because otherwise, when people first came to South Dakota, this is just one big flat area, one big flat grassland. Very few trees, maybe along riverbeds, or there would be these little hollows where trees would grow up. But basically, there was not a lot of protection out here to stop the wind from blowing. So one of the programs that was instituted during the Depression was people were encouraged to plant these shelter belts to help break up the wind, protect the soil, and this kind of stuff. So we had these tree belts, and we've always tried to protect them and keep them going. And so and I always enjoyed the tree belts, because it would give me this it would be my little fantasy land that I would go into, I guess kind of like now I'm trying to think something. I'm blanking. Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin. There we go. His 3-acre wood that he would go off and have his adventures in. So I had 2 places I could go, and they were both about 5 acres roughly. But I could go in there, and I could let my imagination run wild. I could be Robin Hood, or I could be off in adventures and walking through there, or sometimes I would see the animals, or I would look at the trees and find mushrooms growing out there, different wildlife and different plants and stuff. So this was my, you know, place of imagination. But then as you keep going further south, you get down to the south end of the farm. There is a creek that runs through. It's a very seasonal creek. When the when the snow melts, or if we get a really heavy rain, there will be water running through it. But otherwise, probably about 90% of the year, it's not flowing. We dug a couple dugouts in the creek bed down there to catch water to hold it, so the cows would have a place to drink when they're down there grazing. Because this land at the very south end wasn't really suitable for planting, because again it was kind of rolling hills, valleys, this kind of stuff. So, but again, and that was another interesting place too, is the creek down there. I think technically, if I remember, it's part of Pearl Creek. Is it Pearl Creek, or maybe it's tributary that feeds into Pearl Creek that eventually feeds into the James River on down the line to the Gulf of Mexico eventually. But I would go walking down there, and I was a kid, and one of the dugouts in the southwest corner, somebody must have brought them out there, because I don't think they were native to this part of the country. But we had, and it was only for a little while. I think eventually the dugout dried up and they died, and maybe because of cows drinking. But we had them disturbing the ground around it. But for a little while we had crayfish or crawfish, however you want to pronounce it, out there. So you could go dig them up, and they were about a few inches long, not really big creatures, but think sort of like a lobster type creature that burrows in the mud and lives off things like that. So I think somebody must have got them from somewhere and went out there and put them out there. But that was always neat. And then you find salamanders. Fish really didn't survive because these things were shallow. You would have winter kill because the ice it's not deep enough, so when the ice froze, anything in there would freeze with it and probably die. But there was still a certain amount of aquatic life out there and plants. And again, that was just a cool place that I could walk around and let my imagination run free, and just try to imagine what it was like before people came to South Dakota and they built fences and plowed up the fields or made fields to plant crops and grow stuff in, and it would just be one big wide open prairie. And this is one of the places I could do it, because that land down in the creek bed was never really disturbed, never plowed up, because it just wouldn't be practical to do. Now obviously the vegetation has changed, because as you graze and do things, native grass tends to fade out, and other hardier grasses like brome move in and take over. But it's just I just like to go down there and imagine, and to see what things were like. But yeah, that's, like I say, that's the home place. Then we have Babblers, and that was named after a man named Paul Babbler. And that's a 1/4 acre of land. And it has a few things. It has again, a little draw over in the southwest corner of it there that it was kind of one of those weird things, because most of that 1/4 is crop ground. But then there in the corner, there was a dugout there, and there was a little grassy draw that went through there. It's about 5 acres or so. And normally we wouldn't graze that, but what Dad would do after we got the crops harvested, he had it fenced off into different things. So we could put the cows in there in the fall and let them graze after we've gotten done combining, so they could graze the grass in that little 5 acre area, but then they could walk over the rest of that field and eat the crops that weren't harvested, and they could eat the weeds that were starting to grow up out there. And then while they were walking around, uh, basically feed in, poop out. So they would also be fertilizing the land to a slight degree by doing that, keeping the weeds down, and that's kind of part of the holistic farming stuff. Is the cows clean up what you didn't harvest. They take care of some of the weeds, put a little fertilizer down, and just kind of keep the cycle of life going. The other kind of interesting distinction about that piece of land, all this land up here has a lot of rocks on it because, again, the James River Escarpment, the James River Valley, that was made when the glaciers came through this part of the state. And so the glaciers acted like a snowplow, and it just plowed the dirt. And as it did that, it pushed it up, and that's what formed the valley. And on the edge of the valley is where a lot of the rocks got pushed that it plowed up. And as after the glacier melted, it carried some of the soil back down into the valley, or it would go off to the other direction, off to the edges of the valley they created away from it. And this stuff that was left along the edges was a lot of rocks. So we have a lot of rocks on our farm, and I have picked a lot of rocks on our farm. But there was one section or one little piece of one area on this babbler land. I don't know why. I would be interested to find out, but there was a lot of rocks in there. At one point, I just quit farming this one area because there was so many rocks in there. It was almost impossible to try and get them out. I think now the guys that do farm it have gone in there with like a rock picker and got a bunch of them out and have reclaimed the land. But that's the most notable thing about that piece of land. Then we have we have Goodman's. Again, that's another quarter. And that one is we used to raise a lot of hay on it. Now I think the neighbors or the tenants that farm that piece of land have plowed it up and have some crops up there. But again, it's another one of those things. There's a couple little draws in there where it's not suitable for farming. So, but I think they can go in there and make some hay on it and get some stuff off of there. But and that was one of those places that I remember Dad had planted just a couple tree strips, not full shelter belts, but just one row of trees, and kind of divided the field up into thirds, again, to provide some windbreak and shelter and things of that nature. I think that, and then at the one end, there's another dugout at the north end that, again, Dad would use. He'd put the cows in there and he could graze that. He always tried to manage things that we were always moving the cows around and putting them on the land so that we would have, more pasture or more feed for the cows rather than just pasture. And again, it would help in weed control and things like that. But it was a pain to move the cows around. You had to fix the fence, and some of those fences were not in the best condition. But that was the way we did things. Now that Goodman quarter connected to what we call Hallbergs, and that one is actually a whole half section. So of that square mile of land, we own 3/4 of it. And the Hallberg land was probably the best land that we had on the farm. It was the south half was, well, it's all pretty relatively flat, no real valleys or draws in there. That was mostly farmland. The biggest distinction about the Hallberg land is that there is a rather big hill on there. I want to say maybe it's I don't can't confirm this, but I think it might be the second tallest hill in southern Clark County. But there is a radio tower that was built there. That was there when we bought the land in, I think, 72 is when Dad bought it, or early 70s. And when it was built, it was a radio tower that a cement company used that had offices in Huron, Mitchell, and Watertown. And so this was before cell phones, and the only way you could, have mobile communications was with two-way radios. But you needed the tower to be able to bounce the signal off to get them to these different areas, because even though South Dakota is relatively flat, you still have areas of varying elevation. And so they would use this tower so they could bounce signals back and forth, because it was kind of a decent midway point for this company. And so it's always been there, but now the company's gone out of business, and we sold that little acreage, like a 1 acre area, to one of the Hutterite colonies that were going to use it for the radio tower. And I don't know if they've kept it up, if they use it, or what's become of it, but it's still on our land there. But besides that, the rest of the land is, like I say, very flat. And there's one area out there where there's just kind of a slough out there. The water runs into there and kind of collects. We have a dugout. And then that's the south half of Hulbergs. The north half is about 2/3 pasture, and it could have probably been broken up into farmland, but we needed pasture for the cows, and that's what we've done. And the neighbor the renter puts his cows over there too. And that has a dugout. But then in kind of the northwest part of that quarter, or actually kind of the north third, roughly, something like that, there's a field there that we plant crops on. And that one it's a very flat field, and so the problem with it being flat is it doesn't really drain. So there's a couple wet spots out there. If we have a wet year, you can't get them planted because you'll get stuck. Now, the good thing about that is if you have a kind of a drier year, it does retain moisture, so the crops do better in that area. But those 3/4, those 3/4 all connect together. And we had gates so we could move the cows from the pasture one field to one of these other fields and graze them off. So we were always moving and rotating them, so none of the pastures got, overgrazed, and we could move them to crop fields after we got the crops off. Dad had built this dugout. It wasn't the best place to build a dugout. It should have been like a few hundred feet to the south in the slight little creek bed that goes down through there, because it would have collected the water better. But he built in this one place because he built a fence around it so that he could open up one end of this fence when the cows were in the pasture, and they'd be able to go in there and drink water. But then when he wanted to graze that field to the north, he could open up the other end, let them graze in that field, and keep them off the pasture to give it a chance to recover. So he was always rotating the cows and moving them around. I just don't see that kind of, maybe people still do it, but I just don't see that kind of practice anymore of people moving their cows around and grazing they do put cows out in the pasture, on the farm ground when they get it harvested. But I just don't see that as much, and I don't think they do it quite to the extent that Dad did, where he had this whole system of moving them around and doing things like that. And then the last piece of land is the school section. Now, that was named because at one point the Department of Education in South Dakota, I don't remember the exact details, but I think the state gave them land that they could use to generate income for the schools. Well, so this section was sold off, and they did it in 40-acre chunks. And so we had bought one 40-acre chunk there when this land was sold. And then we had a neighbor, because ours was on the edge of the section, and then the neighbor, and I don't even remember which one it was, had the land that was kind of in the middle there, so he had to drive across our land to get to it. And it just got to the point where he said to my dad, "Hey, do you just want to buy this 40, make it part of yours, and then that way I don't have to be driving across your land?" Dad would go, "Yeah, that sounds fine." So that's how we ended up with this 80 acres. And again, that's another one of those things. It's just kind of this big flat area. It is kind of on a side of a slightly sloping hill. It's not like perfectly flat. There is a slope to the land. And there's this one spot that's really rocky. I went out there and picked plenty of rocks, but when that land was broken up, because it was virgin soil at that time, Dad broke it up, and my brothers went out there to pick rocks, and my brother told me this one spot, we had this flatbed that was probably an 8 by 12 flatbed on wheels that we used to pick rocks with. And they went out there and parked this flatbed in this one spot and picked 3 loads of rocks off it and hauled it. So there's another area of intense rocks, and again, I think finally got it cleaned up so that it's pretty good. And at the north end of this 80 acres, there is a little draw there, or not a draw, but a little pond, little depression there. It's a seasonal thing, because when it's dry, Dad and I have gone out there and we put up hay out there because reed canary grass grows out there. Reed canary grass it grows quite tall, like maybe 2-3 feet high, and it gives you a good volume of hay, but it's not the best hay in the world because it's kind of coarse. And I always hated it going out there to make hay, because we would always stack the hay, which means we would take a loader, had a special bucket on the front with tines, and it was like probably about 6-8 feet wide, and Dad would cut the hay and put it in a windrow, and then you take the bucker, as we called it, on the front of the loader and push it in the piles, and you take the piles and push them together and make a stack of hay. Well, I always hated, and the teeth on that bucker are spaced about a foot apart, maybe 1.5 feet apart. It's been a while, I don't remember exactly, but they're spaced apart. Well, the problem is this reed canary grass is kind of a long, narrow grass, and when you go to bucket, it kind of slides between the teeth. It didn't really catch and go into a pile, so you always kind of had to back up and get another run at it and try to get it to bunch together. So I always kind of I didn't like going out there to make it, but most of the times of the year it's a little wet, maybe slightly swampy out there, so it wasn't good for much. If it dried up, it would be good for hay, but as far as farming, it really didn't offer a whole lot, because it's out there in the middle. You can't take cows out there, and you don't want to be fencing off an 80-acre piece of land like that. I don't even know if the neighbors would be crazy about fencing it in or not. So, but the one good thing about that area, I didn't do a lot of hunting, but there's a few times I went out deer hunting, and I did learn that it was a good place. The deer like to bed down in there because it's out in the middle of the section there, and kind of away from traffic, and it's not a well-traveled area, so it's a good place for them to bed down and not be disturbed. So if you were one of the people that got there the very first day of deer hunting season, and you just kind of crept over the hill, there is a decent chance you could see a deer out there. Yeah, I'm not the greatest hunter. I think I've shot like one deer in my whole life, and I think it was more of there was a herd and I accidentally hit one, so it's not like I was a great hunter or anything. But I did like the pursuit of the game. And a friend of mine and I would go out there, and like I say, if we got there, it would be a good place. Or once hunting season kicks in and the deer are running all over the place, they would try to go down there and hide, and so if you got there when they were hiding, it would always be a good place. But that was the thing about that piece of land. But this is the farm that I grew up in, and it's all these different experiences and different things about living on the farm and experiencing it, that I've taken into my own life, like the rock picking and the fence fixing, this kind of stuff have taught me about you have to do a job needs to be done, and just taught you about sticking to it and getting the job done. But also it's given me an appreciation for the land, what it takes to produce a crop, to produce cows or pigs or sheep. And I wish more people would come to understand the work that's involved, the time, the money that's involved in producing their food. But it also just kind of gave me this. I've also think about, especially when I would stand on the edge of that hill, looking down into the James River. It just the freedom that it just reinforced the freedom I think that this country embodies. That you just look out there in this free open area, and you see all these people doing things that they're out there doing their own things, or doing their own farms, whatever, making a living for themselves, and you just kind of it makes you realize what we have in this country and how special it is, and how we need to protect it and fight for it. And it's because of our freedom that we you can look out there and you see your neighbor doing something different than you. It's not like in a socialist society where you'd have the government planning everything for you and telling you what you need to do. You have a farmer who, if he wants to raise flax over here and he can make money doing it, that's fine. Other people raise corn and soybeans. Now we have factory farms popping up, which I'm not crazy about, but it's still, I guess it's probably going to be the way of the future. But if it's more, I'm hoping that these things are more locally controlled, not part of some big corporate nationwide system. But if somebody wants to be able to build a big barn and have a bunch of pigs in it and make money, they can do that. But like I say, just looking out over the land, we have the freedom to do these things. And if everybody does what they think is best, hopefully we can, all this will come together to help, create a better country. I've always believed that a mass of individuals doing their own thing, but in a cooperative way, not fighting amongst each other, but just going, everybody finds their own little niche. I've always thought that's what makes us a country, not big government, not, control, not regulations. It's giving people the freedom to try their own things and do their own stuff. But like I say, that this is, the story of the farm that I grew up on, the actual land. And, hopefully that will give people kind of an insight into how one of the reasons why I've grown up to be, the way I am, and, understand, my mindset and stuff. But, I thank you for coming along with me on this journey. And, I'm hoping that by just being able to sit down and ramble like this and tell a story, because this is what it's about. It's about, Bart on the Plains. It's about telling stories. And so, hopefully I will tell my stories and people will find it interesting and maybe give you something to talk about. But, and I guess I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos lately, reaction videos, music reaction videos. That's sort of a weird thing I've stumbled into, and I really kind of like it. Like all these people who've never heard the music that I grew up listening to, and they discover it and they appreciate it. So I've been watching them and trying to up my game a little bit. And one of the things I realize is that they tend to be a little freer and ramble on a little bit like I've been doing here, and make it personal without giving away too much personal information. But the other thing that they do that I should probably work on too is a little bit more self-promotion. and they always, either begin or end their podcasts and where to find information about them. So if you want to find out more about what I do, you can go to, like I say, I think the best place is my personal page. That's Mike-McPeek. That's MCPEEK.com. And I will have, links to my different podcasts. And I also have a gallery of pictures that I've taken and kind of art that I've done that you can check out. And I also have a blog there that I haven't done in quite a while, but I do have, and maybe I should sit down there and type up some things and put in there, but just some thoughts I've had and a few things like that. But and if you want to hear the podcast or see it, it'll be on Spotify. I have created a YouTube channel now where I'm posting this stuff, so you can find it those places, and then it's on Spotify and where all the other good podcasts placed: Apple, Amazon, iHeartRadio. It's on all these different places. I try to put it out there so people will have a easy enough time trying to find it. But for now, I guess I will just wrap this up. I'm going to sit down and I've got my mug here. I might as well. It's Wild Bill's. We found this place it's a craft beverage drinking place at the state fair, and I thought this is a cool mug, so I'm drinking. I've got some tea in here. Live healthy, yay! It's herbal tea, something for my throat because it's getting a little dry right now. There we go. It helped a little bit. Hopefully you didn't find that too offensive, but I took a drink. Yeah, no, I'm a little better. But yeah, I'll be back with another one. Hopefully next Sunday I will make myself another cup of tea, sit down and ramble here a little bit and tell another story. And I've got some other ideas in mind on things that I hope you might find interesting about me and South Dakota and farming. But until the next time, just remember, you are the creator of your own story. See you later.
Oh, bard on the plains, sing your song tonight, with your tales of glory and wild delight. We've gathered around just to hear you spin the stories of old and the new to begin.